She was fired at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Security escorted her out through the loading dock so the day shift wouldn't see her crying. 23 years as an ICU nurse, and this is how it ended. A cardboard box with her coffee mug, a photo of her kids, and a termination letter that used words like insubordination and unauthorized intervention. 3 weeks later, she stood at a funeral. But she wasn't there as a mourner. The family had asked her to deliver the eulogy. To understand how Maria Santos went from being escorted out of Metro General Hospital to speaking at the funeral of a patient she barely knew for 72 hours, you need to go back to the night everything changed. And I mean everything. Metro General is one of those hospitals that sits in the middle of a mid-sized Midwestern city, serving everyone from the uninsured to the wealthy families in the suburbs. It's not a teaching hospital. It's not a research centre. It's just a community hospital trying
to keep its doors open while insurance reimbursements shrink and staffing gets tighter every quarter. Maria Santos had worked the ICU night shift there for over 2 decades. She'd seen administrators come and go. She'd watched the unit shrink from 24 beds to 18. She'd trained nurses who were now charge nurses at other hospitals. At 51 years old, Maria was the kind of nurse that knew residents either loved or feared. She had a sixth sense for patients who were about to crash. The attending physicians trusted her assessments. When Maria said something was wrong, you listened. But here's what you need to understand about Maria Santos. She followed the rules. Always had. In 23 years, she'd never had a single disciplinary action. Not one. She showed up early, stayed late, documented everything meticulously, and never once overstepped the boundaries between nursing and medicine. That reputation is what makes what happened next so hard to explain. November 14th, a Thursday night. Maria was 4 hours into her 12-hour shift when the ER called up with an admission. 67-year-old male, Robert Kendrick, came in with chest pain and shortness of breath. ER worked him up, troponins are negative, EKG looks okay, but his oxygen sat keeps dipping. They're ruling out PECT was negative. They want to admit for observation. Maria took the report over the phone, jotting notes on the back of her hand like she always did. "What's his story?" she asked. "Retired high school principal, wife's in the waiting room. He's scared but trying not to show it. You know the type." Maria did know the type. She'd taken care of hundreds of them. Robert Kendrick arrived on the unit at 11:23 p.m. Maria was his assigned nurse. Now, I want you to picture Robert for a moment. 67 years old, still had a full head of grey hair, the kind of man who probably coached Little League and showed up to every school board meeting. His wife, Denise, sat in the chair beside his bed, holding his hand like she was afraid to let go. "I keep telling them I feel fine now," Robert said as Maria connected him to the monitors. "The pain went away hours ago. This is probably nothing." "Probably," Maria agreed, adjusting his oxygen. "But probably is why we watch you overnight. Make sure probably stays definitely." Robert smiled at that. "You've done this before." "Once or twice." Here's what Maria noticed in those first few minutes. Robert's vitals were stable. Blood pressure, 138/82. Heart rate, 76. Oxygen saturation holding at 94% on 2 litres. All of it well within acceptable ranges. But something about his breathing wasn't right. It wasn't laboured exactly, it was careful. Like he was thinking about each breath. Like his body was working harder than the numbers suggested. Maria made a note. She'd keep an eye on it. At midnight, she checked on him again. Same vitals, same careful breathing. "How are you?" At 1 a.m., Maria was charting at the nurse's station when something made her look up at his monitor on the central display. Oxygen saturation, 92%. That was new. She walked to his room. Robert was asleep, Denise dozing in the chair. Maria watched him breathe for 30 seconds. Still that careful rhythm, still that subtle effort. She increased his oxygen to 3 litres and made another note. Now, here's where I need to tell you something about hospital medicine at 1 a.m. The attending physician covering the ICU that night was Dr. Richard Holloway. 62 years old, been at Metro General for 31 years, one of the senior hospitalists who'd resisted retirement even as his colleagues left for easier schedules. Dr. Holloway was a good doctor, competent, experienced. But at 1 a.m., Dr. Holloway was also covering 43 patients across 4 floors. He was exhausted. He'd been on shift for 19 hours, and he had 3 other patients who were actively unstable. When Maria paged him about Robert Kendrick's oxygen dip, here's what he said. CT was negative, troponin's negative, EKG's fine. He's probably just anxious. Increase the O2 and let him rest. Call me if he drops below 90. Doctor, I think we should repeat the imaging. Something doesn't feel right. Maria, I've got a GI bleeder on 4 and a post-op that won't stop fibrillating. The man's workup was negative. Let's not chase ghosts. She wanted to push harder. She knew she should push harder. But Maria Santos followed the rules, and the rules said the doctor makes the medical decisions. Okay, she said. I'll call if anything changes. At 2 a.m., Robert's oxygen sat dropped to 91%. At 2:30, it was 89%. Maria was in his room, increasing his oxygen to 6 litres, when Robert opened his eyes. Nurse? I'm here, Mr. Kendrick. Something's wrong. His voice was different now. Thready, scared. It feels like I can't get enough air. Like there's a weight on my chest. Maria's heart rate spiked. She'd heard that description before, dozens of times, and it was almost never anxiety. She hit the call light. I need respiratory at bedside, now. And page Dr. Holloway again. Tell him the patient is decompensating. The respiratory therapist arrived in 3 minutes. By then, Robert's oxygen was at 86%, even on high-flow oxygen. Dr. Holloway called back 7 minutes later. What's going on? He's crashing, doctor. Sat's in the mid-80s on high flow. He's working hard to breathe. I think we're missing something. The CT was clean 4 hours ago. Did he aspirate? I don't think so. He's been NPO. Something else is happening. There was a pause. Maria could hear Dr. Holloway's exhaustion through the phone. Okay, get a portable chest x-ray. I'll be up in 20 minutes after I stabilise this GI bleeder. Doctor, I don't think we have 20 minutes. Just get the x-ray, Maria. I'll be there as soon as I can. He hung up. Now, I need you to pause here with me for a second. What would you do? You're a nurse. You've been doing this for 23 years. You know something is terribly wrong with this patient. The doctor, a good doctor, an experienced doctor, has given you an order. Get the x-ray. Wait for him. But your gut is screaming that waiting might kill this man. What Maria did next is why she got fired. And it's also why she was asked to speak at that funeral. The portable x-ray arrived at 2:47 a.m. The tech took the images and sent them to radiology. But Maria didn't wait for the official read. She pulled up the images on the computer at the nurses' station and looked at them herself. Now, nurses aren't trained to read x-rays. That's not their job. That's not their scope of practice. Maria knew this. But after 23 years in the ICU, she'd seen thousands of chest x-rays. She knew what normal looked like. And this didn't look normal. The left side of Robert's chest was different, darker where it should have been lighter, and there was something along the edge of his heart that shouldn't have been there. Maria wasn't a radiologist. She couldn't tell you exactly what she was seeing, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This man was dying, and no one was moving fast enough to stop it. At 2:52 a.m., Maria Santos made a phone call that ended her career. She didn't call Dr. Holloway. She called Dr. James Chen, the cardiothoracic surgeon on call, directly, without authorization, without going through the chain of command. She woke him up at home. Dr. Chen, this is Maria Santos in the ICU at Metro General. I have a patient who I believe is having a cardiac emergency. The attending is tied up with other patients. I think this man has a dissecting aorta, and I think he's going to die in the next hour if someone doesn't intervene. There was silence on the other end. Who is the attending? Dr. Holloway. And he's aware of the patient. He ordered a chest x-ray. He's coming up when he can. But doctor, I've been a nurse for 23 years. I know when someone is dying. This man is dying. More silence. Maria could hear Dr. Chen processing what she was saying. She was asking him to override a colleague based on a nurse's gut feeling. That's not how hospitals work. Send me the x-ray, he finally said. I'll look at it right now. Maria hung up and sent the images. 90 seconds later, her phone rang. Get into the OR, now. Page the anaesthesiologist, page my team, and get him prepped. I'm on my way in. What do you see? Type A aortic dissection. It wasn't visible on the CT because it's small and posterior, but it's there on the x-ray. And if that thing ruptures, he's dead in minutes. Move, now. Maria moved. She called for transport. She paged the OR team. She personally pushed Robert's bed toward the elevator while explaining to a terrified Denise that her husband needed emergency surgery. What's happening? What's wrong with him? His aorta is tearing. Dr. Chen is going to fix it, but we have to move fast. Oh, God. Oh, God. Mrs. Kendrick, I need you to stay strong for him right now. Can you do that? Denise nodded, tears streaming down her face. They were in the elevator when Maria's phone rang again. It was Dr. Holloway. Maria, what the hell is going on? I just got paged that my patient is being taken to the OR by Chen. I didn't authorize any surgical consult. Doctor, the patient has a type A aortic dissection. Dr. Chen identified it on the chest x-ray. He's taking him to surgery now. You called Chen directly, without talking to me first? There wasn't time, doctor. The patient was crashing. That wasn't your call to make. Maria looked at Robert Kendrick, struggling to breathe, barely conscious now, his wife holding his hand. I understand, doctor. I'll accept whatever consequences come. But right now, I need to get this patient to the OR. She hung up. Here's what I haven't told you yet. At 3:14 a.m., while the surgical team was prepping Robert for the operation, his aorta ruptured. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Dr. Chen's hands were already inside Robert's chest when it happened. The tear had extended. Blood was filling the pericardial sac, compressing his heart. Tamponade, I need suction, more suction. Get me more units of blood up here now. The OR erupted into controlled chaos. Blood pressure crashed. The anaesthesiologist was pushing medications as fast as the pharmacy could send them. Robert Kendrick's heart stopped at 3:21 a.m. They got it beating again 4 minutes later. It stopped twice more over the next 2 hours. The surgery that should have taken 4 hours took 7. And at 10:23 a.m., Dr. James Chen walked out of the OR to tell Denise Kendrick that her husband was alive. Barely, but alive. The repair was successful. The next 48 hours are critical. He's not out of the woods, but he's alive and he has a chance. Denise collapsed into tears. But here's the thing. While Dr. Chen was saving Robert Kendrick's life, the hospital administration was already building a case against Maria Santos. By 6 a.m., the chief nursing officer had been notified. By 6:30, human resources was involved. By 6:47, Maria was being walked to the security office. The charges were straightforward. Practicing outside her scope.
Nurses don't interpret X-rays. Nurses don't diagnose cardiac conditions. Nurses don't call surgeons directly without physician authorization. Insubordination. She had been told to get an X-ray and wait. She didn't wait. Breach of chain of command. She bypassed the attending physician and made clinical decisions that weren't hers to make. The CNO was apologetic but firm. Maria, I know you think you did the right thing, and maybe you did. But we can't have nurses making medical decisions. We can't have staff going around the chain of command whenever they disagree with a doctor. It sets a precedent we can't support. He would have died. Maybe, but that's not the point. The process exists for a reason. The process would have killed him. Maria, I'm sorry, but this is a termination offence. We're not going to pursue legal action. We're not going to report you to the nursing board. But your employment here is over. Maria stood up. She picked up her box. Can I see him before I go? The patient? I don't think that's a good idea. Please. The CNO hesitated. 5 minutes, then security will escort you out. Robert Kendrick was sedated, on a ventilator, surrounded by machines that were keeping him alive. His wife was asleep in the chair beside him, still holding his hand. Maria stood in the doorway for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. She didn't say anything. She just watched him breathe. Then she left. Now, if you're sitting there thinking the hospital was wrong to fire her, I want you to hold that thought. Because the truth is more complicated than it seems. Dr. Holloway wasn't a bad doctor. He was an exhausted doctor, covering too many patients in a system that doesn't hire enough staff. If he'd been able to come see Robert immediately, would he have caught the dissection? Maybe. Probably. We'll never know. The chain of command exists because medicine is complicated and dangerous. Nurses who make their own diagnoses and call their own shots can cause as much harm as good. For every Maria Santos who's right, there might be 10 who are wrong, and patients die because someone overstepped. I'm honestly not sure where I land on this one. She saved a life. She also broke every rule she'd followed for 23 years. Was she right? I think so. Would I want every nurse in every hospital making the same call? I genuinely don't know. Robert Kendrick spent 11 days in the ICU. He coded twice more in the first week. His kidneys failed and recovered. He developed pneumonia that required additional treatment. But slowly, impossibly, he started to get better. On day 12, they moved him to a regular room. On day 18, he took his first steps with physical therapy. On day 26, he went home. Denise Kendrick never stopped asking about the nurse from that first night. There was a nurse, Maria, I think. She was there when everything happened. I'd like to thank her. The staff gave vague answers. She's no longer at Metro General. We'll pass along your message. But Denise wasn't satisfied. She tracked down Dr. Chen and asked him directly, "Who was she? The nurse who called you that night?" Dr. Chen hesitated. He'd been asked not to discuss the circumstances of that night. But he'd also spent 7 hours with his hands inside Robert Kendrick's chest. Her name was Maria Santos. She was an ICU nurse. She saw something that everyone else missed, and she made a call that probably saved your husband's life.
Where is she now? The hospital terminated her employment. Denise's face went through about 6 emotions in 3 seconds. They fired her for saving my husband's life? It's complicated. She stepped outside her role. There are rules about what nurses can and can't do. Give me her phone number. Mrs. Kendrick, I don't think... Dr. Chen, that woman saved my husband. Give me her phone number. He did. Now, here's where this story takes a turn I wasn't expecting when I first heard it. Maria Santos went home the day she was fired and spent the next 3 weeks in what she described as a fog. 23 years of her identity gone in an hour. She didn't know who she was anymore. Her kids called, her former colleagues texted. She answered none of it. Then her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Miss Santos, this is Denise Kendrick. I'm Robert's wife, the patient from November 14th. Maria's heart stopped. Oh, Mrs. Kendrick, how is he? Is he okay? He's home. He's alive. Because of you. Maria started to cry. She'd spent 3 weeks wondering if she'd ruined her life for nothing. If maybe she'd been wrong. If maybe the hospital was right and she'd overstepped. Hearing that he was alive, it was like oxygen after drowning. I heard what happened to you, Denise said. I heard they fired you for calling Dr. Chen. It's okay. I knew what I was doing. It's not okay. And I want you to know that we're going to fight this. Robert and we've already contacted a lawyer. What they did to you was wrong. Maria took a breath. Mrs. Kendrick, Denise, that's kind of you. But I don't want to fight. I did what I did because I knew it was right, not because I expected to keep my job. I've made peace with it. But they can't just... They can. And in some ways, I understand why they did. The rules I broke exist for good reasons. In that moment, with your husband, the rules didn't matter more than his life. There was silence on the line. Then Denise said something Maria didn't expect. Robert wants to meet you. When he's stronger. He wants to thank you in person. I'd like that. And Maria, we're not letting this go. Even if you don't want to fight, we're going to make sure people know what you did. If you're watching this and wondering whether Robert Kendrick made a full recovery, here's your answer. He didn't. The dissection and the complications took a toll. His heart was weaker than before. His kidneys never fully recovered. The man who used to coach baseball and attend every school board meeting now got tired walking to the mailbox. But he was alive. He got to see his daughter get married 6 months later. He got to hold his first grandchild, born the following spring. He got 18 more months. And then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Robert Kendrick's heart gave out. Denise was holding his hand when it happened. It was gentle. It was peaceful. It was nothing like that night in the ICU when his aorta was tearing apart. The man who should have died at 3:21 a.m. on November 15th instead died 18 months later, surrounded by family, having seen and done everything that mattered most. That's not a tragedy. That's 18 months of gift. The funeral was held on a Saturday. Over 200 people attended. Former students, colleagues, family, friends. And when it came time for the eulogy, Denise Kendrick stood up and said something no one expected. I've asked someone to speak today who most of you don't know, but without her, we wouldn't have had these last 18 months. Without her, Robert would have died that night in the hospital, and I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what went wrong. She was fired for saving his life. The hospital said she broke the rules. And maybe she did, but some rules are worth breaking. Maria Santos walked to the front of that church in a black dress she'd bought the day before, hands shaking, facing 200 strangers. She'd prepared a speech, written it out, practiced it, memorized it. She forgot every word the moment she reached the podium. So she spoke from the heart instead. I only knew Robert Kendrick for a few hours. He was scared, but he was trying not to show it. He made a joke about coaching baseball. He called me ma'am. She smiled through tears. But in those few hours, I knew who he was. He was the kind of man who didn't want to bother anyone, the kind of man who would minimize his own pain because he didn't want to make a fuss. That night, I made a decision that cost me my career. I've spent a lot of time wondering if it was the right thing to do, wondering if I overstepped, wondering if maybe the rules exist for good reasons and I should have followed them. But then I think about these last 18 months. I think about his daughter's wedding. I think about the grandchild he got to hold. I think about all the days Denise got to spend with him, and all the conversations they got to have, and all the small moments that make a life worth living. And I know I'd do it again, every single time. Robert Kendrick deserved those 18 months, and if breaking the rules was the price for giving them to him, then I'm glad I paid it. She stepped away from the podium. The church was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the whole church was on its feet. Maria Santos, the nurse who was fired for what she did, stood in front of 200 strangers and wept. Now, here's what happened after. The local news picked up the story. Then the national news. Nurse fired for saving patient's life asked to speak at his funeral. It was the kind of story that goes viral because it hits something deep in people. Metro General Hospital faced a public relations nightmare. Their carefully worded statement about following established protocols and supporting all members of our healthcare team satisfied no one. 3 weeks after the funeral, Maria received a phone call from the hospital's CEO. They wanted to offer her her job back. Full reinstatement. Back pay for the year she'd been unemployed. A formal apology from the administration. And a new policy being developed about clinical judgment in emergency situations. Maria listened to the offer. Then she said, "No, thank you." "Ms. Santos, I understand you might be upset, but I'm not upset. I've made peace with what happened. But I'm not coming back to a place that fired me for doing the right thing just because public pressure made it embarrassing for you. That's not how trust works. What would it take to change your mind?" "Nothing. I've already accepted a position at St. Catherine's. They reached out after the story broke. They said they want nurses who trust their instincts. That's where I belong now." She hung up. Maria Santos works at St. Catherine's Hospital now. She's been there for 2 years. She's already been promoted to charge nurse on the night shift. She still thinks about Robert Kendrick. There's a photo on her phone that Denise sent her, Robert holding his grandson, taken 3 weeks before he died. She looks at it sometimes when the shifts get hard. The grandson's name is Robert. Robert James Kendrick. The James is for Dr. Chen, the surgeon who spent 7 hours putting Robert's heart back together. But here's the part that still gets me. Maria Santos followed the rules for 23 years. 23 years of doing exactly what she was supposed to do. Never overstepping, never questioning, trusting the system. And it took one night, one patient, for her to realise that sometimes the rules aren't enough. Sometimes the system fails. And when it does, someone has to be willing to break the rules to save a life. The question that haunts me about this story isn't whether Maria was right. She was. The outcome proves it. The question that haunts me is, how many patients are out there right now whose nurses see something wrong but don't make the call? How many Robert Kendricks die because the Maria Santoses of the world follow the rules? I don't know the answer. I'm not sure anyone does. But I know this. Every time a nurse trusts their gut over protocol, they're risking their career. And every time they don't, they might be risking a life. That's not a comfortable place to be. That's not a system that works. And until it changes, stories like this will keep happening. Robert Kendrick got 18 months because one nurse refused to
Let him die on her watch. She lost her job. She lost her career. She stood at a funeral and gave a eulogy for a man she barely knew. And she said she'd do it again. Every single time. Stories like Maria's happen more often than hospitals want to admit. The ones people send me, nurses, doctors, patients, families, they keep getting more unbelievable. Subscribe if you want to hear what drops next. And if you've ever been the patient who knew something was wrong before the tests confirmed it, or the family member who had to fight to be heard, I want to know what happened. What did it take for someone to finally listen?